with all the Carolina Panther fans, I'm sure, wondering what the hell General Manager David Gettleman was doing with the 2015 NFL Draft. Let me attempt to go glass half full with this draft class and philosophy for the Panthers this year and try to put as much of an optimistic spin on it as I possibly can. As I do think in some ways that you could be very optimistic about what this Panthers organization did. We'll start off with the first round pick, Shaq Thompson. This is a Panthers organization that for years has really hit nicely when it comes to their first round picks. They have a pretty good history of this over the large portion of a decade or so. They haven't hit home runs on every single one, but the majority of them they have. And you're looking at a guy like a Shaq Thompson, and you're saying if the Panthers felt he was worth a first-round pick, maybe they know what the hell they're talking about, and there you go. With that also said, you look at a guy like Shaq Thompson. Here's a guy that brings a lot of athleticism and versatility to the back half of your defense. He brings you a young will backer that you really didn't have, a guy that also has a lot of experience as a pass defender, so a guy that is you're very comfortable deploying him out there to defend against running backs coming out of the backfield, tight ends in the slot, even wide receivers out of the slot. With some of the different hybrid looks you do on defense today, here's a guy that you could line up as a third safety or in certain situations line him up as a safety. A lot of different things, very much a gadget player. Maybe if you get in a pinch on the running back side of things, you always got Shaq Thompson there as well. Who the hell knows? But this is the type of athletic football player you look at and you sit there and say, there's a lot of different things you could do with him. It could make a lot of sense, the versatility that he brings. It seems like in many ways a Seattle Seahawks type of prospect. Then you look at round 2 and Devin Funchess. And you say, well, you've got one big physical receiver outside in Kelvin Benjamin. Why not pair him up with another big physical receiver on the other side in Devin Funchess? A productive player at Michigan who produced both at tight end and wide receiver, borrowing from the Bears' philosophy of a few years with Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. It worked for them at times. If they didn't have such a turret at quarterback like Jay Cutler, could have worked even better. You see other teams like Tampa Bay in their division. You're doing it with Vincent Jackson and Mike Evans. You've got Atlanta has two, stud receivers on the outside in Julio Jones and Roddy White. So there's an understanding here of why they would look at wide receiver as being a position they wanted to address. Another really good wide receiver class, so why not dip into it with a big physical guy? Especially when this was a wide receiver class that had a lot of smaller, quick twitch type of slot guys. You look at their 4th-round pick, Daryl Williams. You're looking at a guy that can come in right away and compete for that right tackle job, you would assume, and probably win that right tackle job as a rookie. Upgrading the protection in front of Cam Newton, which needed to be upgraded because it was criminally bad in 2014. I could even look at a 5th-round pick like Cameron Artis-Payne, while a bit of an overage prospect, I think at 24, 25 years of age. Here's a running back that was productive at Auburn. Here's a guy that has a nice skill set and a guy that is ready to contribute in a role behind Jonathan Stewart right away at the NFL level. When I look at it from that standpoint, it's not so bad, is it? There are plenty of things you could say in theory that there are to like about the Carolina Panthers draft. Oh, but then we get to the flip side of this. And you look at Shaq Thompson. A lot of people were thinking that Shaq Thompson would be somebody the Carolina Panthers would target, but perhaps in round number 2. And instead, apparently, they decided they were going to target him in round number 1. There's a lot of concern about the fact that he was a guy that was supposed to be so athletic, but he really didn't test all that particularly well at the combine. And you've seen certain comparisons to other players with similar athletic traits that just produced and played better. I think in some ways that's a bit unfair to Shaq Thompson because he was asked to do a lot of different things, both defensively and offensively at Washington in 2014. One thing that would encourage me is the fact that he was willing to go play a few games at running back on the offensive side of the ball to help his team out. That kind of team-first mentality fits into the type of player that he is in terms of the versatility that he brings. And me personally, I am a fan of Shaq Thompson as a prospect, maybe a little bit more as a safety than as a linebacker. But I understand why people question the selection of Shaq Thompson. They thought there were better players on the board, and especially for the Carolina Panthers at bigger positions of need, namely offensive tackle. And then you turn around in round number 2, and not only do you take Devin Funchess, you trade up and give up several picks to go get a guy like Devin Funchess, who many would argue is not the best receiver on the board at that particular time, and I happen to agree with that. You could also sit there and say you've already got one big physical wide receiver that struggles with his hands in Kelvin Benjamin. Now you've added another guy in Devin Funchess into the mold that's pretty much the same type of guy. Well, you could sit there and say that puts less of a premium on Cam Newton to have to be 100% accurate and precise, especially behind that offensive line. God knows who the hell would have time to do so. It's also maybe a good sign that they are planning on keeping Cam Newton long term. They'll get the deal done, what have you. It's just, again, you traded up, you gave up several picks. Yes, you had some of those compensatory picks, which lessens the blow of having to trade up and give up that much to go get a Funchess, but you still gave up a lot in terms of draft pick currency in order to get a guy that, in my opinion, wasn't the best player available and wasn't even the best wide receiver available on the board at that time. And doesn't really bring anything different to the table in a lot of ways than Kelvin Benjamin. And when you look at Funchess, he's a guy with his size. You have concerns about his ability to separate. Sometimes he had some inconsistency in his hands. And in particular, what concerns you for a guy of that size, only having played wide receiver 1 year, this is a guy that didn't make the number of big, spectacular, tough catches over the top that you might associate that a guy that his size would. And then you look at it, they had to move up to get Daryl Williams in round number 4. They got an offensive tackle at least, but is he really going to play left tackle at the NFL level? I think that's a bit ambitious to think that. So who the hell is going to protect Cam Newton's blind side? I understand why a lot of Carolina Panthers don't particularly like this draft for the team. Because in a lot of ways, based off of where they were sitting, based off the way the board had broken down, based off of different scenarios, I don't know that I particularly like it either. I like Thompson. I like Funchess as a prospect, maybe more as a middle round 3 prospect than a middle round 2 prospect. I think Daryl Williams is a solid right tackle starter at the NFL level. I'm a fan of Cameron Artis-Payne, even though he's a bit overaged as a prospect. I like some of the players in this draft class. I could even see some of the upside to potentially stashing away a guy like a David Mayo, the linebacker from Texas State, their first 5th-round pick, using him potentially to be groomed as a long-term replacement for Thomas Davis. I understand it. So I see what the Panthers are trying to do. Like I said, I don't know if I particularly like it. Especially with the trade up for Devin Funchess in round 2. At that point in time, you would think if they were going to be trading up for anybody, they would maybe trade up for a Jake Fisher because they need somebody to potentially protect that blind side for Cam Newton, and he was still there, a guy that some thought might sneak into the back end of round number 1. So in terms of their best pick, I do think it's Daryl Williams because he filled the biggest need, and I thought it was decent value based off of where they got him. And he'll come in and probably be a starter right away. I think a guy like Cameron Artis-Payne could surprise. When the inevitable Jonathan Stewart injury probably happens in 2015, a guy like Artis-Payne could come in and be a short-term fill-in starter for them and be a productive player. But again, the second guessing comes in with Shaq Thompson at number 25. I like Shaq. I do as a prospect. I thought some people unfairly crapped on him as a prospect. Didn't see the bigger picture with Shaq Thompson as a prospect. But I don't know that he was a top 25 player in this draft once I started evaluating the draft and everything. And furthermore, I thought he was a bit of a luxury pick for the Carolina Panthers team that I didn't think quite was in a position in terms of the draft where they could afford a luxury pick. And then you factor in it was probably a big reach. That doesn't help. And then the Funchess pick as well. Funchess pick is going to be one of those situations where if he goes out and he produces as a rookie, even somewhat similar to a level that Kelvin Benjamin did in 2014, then it's really not going to matter what they traded up to get him. We're not going to be talking about it. We're going to talk about how scary that duo is going to be in the NFC South with Cam Newton for a long time to come and Benjamin on one side and Funchess on the other. But in the meantime, the season hasn't happened yet, and you just have to wonder, he wasn't the best prospect on the board at that position. He wasn't the best player on the board, period, at that time, and they gave up a lot to go up and get him. Compensatory picks be damned. Yeah, I give the Panthers like a C- grade for this draft. Is because I just didn't like what they did. I didn't like the philosophy. I just really didn't. This is a team that I expect to contend seriously in the NFC in 2015, but you're not going to be able to do that if you can't better protect Cam Newton, and that was one thing they definitely needed to get accomplished in this draft, and they just failed to do so.